Hi, what's going on, my people? Happy Software Sundays. I'm your host, KD, and today we're going to be discussing some of the latest news inside of the tech industry, as well as some tips and best practices for how you can improve as an engineer and level up inside of your career. So, with that being said, thank you for joining, and let's get started. So, first, I wanted to talk about a breach that happened at DoorDash a few weeks ago. And I wanted to just highlight that security is always a priority and it should always be a priority, whether you're building any type of product, especially if it's consumer facing, and even more of a concern when you get into the critical industry, financial services, healthcare, and those types of industries there, even the government. You have to be aware that there are going to be attackers that are going to try your platform and your system. When we're talking about DoorDash, they have customers all over the world. They are processing transactions daily. They have merchants on their platform and a number of consumers and customers that are ordering from them daily. That is a treasure trove of data for a attacker. They have to, and you as an engineer at their team or even someone working on a similar project that may work with them, you have to be aware of the value of that data and con- take steps to make sure that you aren't releasing any of it in a less than ideal way or less than secure way. This incident was actually caused through a social engineering campaign that happened where one of their employees happened to fall for a phishing attack, and there were some credentials that were leaked that gave the attackers access to the rest of the system. And I'll say the rest of the system, uh, it wasn't everything. It wasn't the holy grail of data, but they were able to access some names, addresses, and simple data like that. They were not able to access any social security numbers or payment information. And everyone who was uh, harmed inside of that attack has been uh, notified about what happened. But it's always something to keep in mind that when you're building systems, security is the most important thing to keep in mind. And it's not just security from data breaches, it's the security against fraud. How do we catch when something is going wrong or not according to what we would normally expect it to act as? Has also been combating some fraud cases where people are submitting AI altered content and photos, videos to request things like refunds or to basically claim that something was wrong with their order that may not have been wrong with the order. So DoorDash as a platform, they're receiving attacks from different sides. And I just wanted to highlight how important it is to think about security as an engineer and think about ways when you're building a feature or when you're building some type of integration between multiple systems. You have to keep in mind that these systems are working inside of environments that are not what you could even think about. It's more than just, hey, we created this very finite set of things that could happen. That's what happens in a testing environment. When we're thinking about production, when we're thinking about a product that is in front of thousands or even millions of customers, our understanding of the environment has to grow in scale with what we're building for. So just keep that in mind. The I've mentioned it before. AI is making n- basic attackers more sophisticated than they've ever been without having to know anything about the system, and is giving already experienced attackers even greater opportunities to attack and breach these systems. So you have to be mindful as an engineer when you're building that you don't unnecessarily or unintentionally leak any type of data. And I also want to uh, just speak about Amazon is in talks to invest another 10 billion into OpenAI. OpenAI right now is looking to raise about 100 billion in the next few months, and that'll put their valuation at nearly $1 trillion. And this is the latest in a number of funding rounds to get to AGI. It's interesting to me though that so many different cloud providers have been investing in OpenAI and all of the products and companies in that space because it really seems like the cloud providers are the winners here. Yes, the application level and AI as a platform is becoming more valuable. There are a number of features in AI native products and legacy products that are being reinvented with AI. Yes, that is happening, but at the end of the day, these cloud service providers are investing inside of the company that's going to run their applications on their system. So that's honestly one of the issues that people keep having when they're talking about an AI bubble. It's the investors of these companies are also some of the customers of the company, and it's a bunch of like cyclical things like that. It's why do we have OpenAI is going to be purchasing resources, right? They're going to be using Amazon servers to train and run their ChatGPT products, Sora, and all of the other products that they're building. So 10 billion from Amazon is going to be spent 10 billion on Amazon. So did we create $20 billion or is it really just $10 billion? And if it's really $10 billion, is it really any money at all? It's making me wonder about even the valuation of a company like OpenAI with the fact that all of their money that they're getting as an investment or as a loan is being spent. It's already been earmarked for where it's going to go, what it needs to be used for. And of course, that makes sense, right? We don't want people raising money without having an actual need or even a plan for how that money will be spent. There are better ways to use that money if otherwise. But it's just it's an interesting dynamic that we're seeing in the market. Um, OpenAI will continue to raise. Like I said, I think they're looking for 100 billion by the end of Q1 of 2026. So this is maybe like the first person or first company that's going to be investing in them for this latest round. Uh, I I do think it's interesting. Google probably won't be investing in them. Google took their own route. They're building their own models, right? That's something that we haven't seen Amazon and Microsoft do. They've both invested inside of the LLM companies or these labs to build the models and train the models, and then they integrate those existing models into their products. Google is taking a uh, fully vertically integrated route where they're building their own models and then integrating those models into their products. So they're, I would say they're probably winning on both sides because they can actually keep all of the costs in house as well as keeping the spending in house. So I guess there's pros and cons to both sides, but it's definitely an interesting dynamic to watch as we're seeing this AI race either heat up or kind of level out currently. It's also worth noting that OpenAI is it's reminding me of other companies that I won't name right now. But a few years ago, when Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and NFTs were becoming really hot, there was one company that was receiving a lot of investment, a lot of funding at the time. And we saw them eventually find out that they were misusing some of those funds. I don't believe that that's the case with OpenAI, but it just makes me think like they're even they've changed their model, right, as an entity. It used to be a nonprofit company, and now they're a for-profit company. And I'm sure there are some IP issues in there, like a company that was created and formed for a public good as a public service provider. I'm wondering how they even sold their IP or their systems or their employee, their customers, everything that made up the company to a for profit company. And how did that for profit company even raise the money to afford what the valuation was of that nonprofit company? And so there's a lot of things in there in terms of just understanding funding and how businesses are even formed that I don't understand yet, but super complicated and interesting to me. Um, and in the vein of AI and consumer products, uh, A6 A16Z released their 2025 State of Consumer AI Apps report. And this report, well, A16Z is a venture capital firm. I think it's Andreessen Howard or provided by them. I'm not sure exactly what the relationship is, but Andreessen Howard's or Howard Andreessen, they basically are or have invested in some of the largest companies in the world. Um, I can't think of some names right now, but I will look that up later on. But their report has come up with a number of interesting findings that I just want to discuss and highlight. So, one, the AI space is starting to mature. We're starting to see uh, less newcomers inside of the runnings, right? There aren't as many new companies taking significant market share as there were a year or even 2 years ago. At this point, we've kind of settled on who's going to be the major players inside of the AI race, right? We're going to have OpenAI, we're going to have uh, Anthropic, we're going to have Google in there. You know, initially they had created Bard, and that was kind of a total flop, but they've since done much better with Gemini and integrating Gemini into their Google Suite. So, and then there are a number of other uh, apps that are doing pretty well since they've been released. But one of the interesting facts is that unlike when you're doing a subscription or when we're talking about media, where one household may have a Hulu subscription, a Netflix subscription, and any other services that they may find interesting. A significant percentage of users of OpenAI are not even checking out Gemini or not even checking out all of the other uh, competitors to their LLM of choice. So that's making it a more sticky market where you're seeing like whoever you have as your customer, you can kind of rely on them being your customer for a significant amount of time moving forward. There's not a lot of changes there to worry about, but they're all still competing for new market share, which is why we're seeing a bunch of fast releases of products, right? OpenAI was on Code Red a week or a two ago, basically where they're trying to compete with Google Gemini and their Nano Banana uh, model. And there's so much innovation happening in the space that it's really becoming a difficult area for anyone to really take over in. So we still have some time before we see any significant, someone leaving the rest of the competitors behind significantly. Starting to mature from that sense. Uh, I I read and still believe that there are some opportunities for AI native apps, especially for apps that can build a more improved consumer customer experience. A lot of the products that OpenAI are building and Google are building are really just how do we add AI into the existing products that we have, the product line that we have, and make it AI uh, integrated, AI enabled. Even with ChatGPT having a bunch of other products being added into it, they've kind of bundled everything together versus there are going to be opportunities for a company that is in the healthcare space to make a specifically tailored application just for healthcare providers or just for the healthcare industry that will give them a greater level of competitiveness and edge against someone who is just building this general agent. And of course, those apps will probably be using a Gemini or a Llama or a ChatGPT model in the back end. But what we're building right now is going to be very data focused, data driven. If you can gather some type of proprietary data into the apps that you're building, you're going to have a good chance to compete with these other companies. So just keep that in mind as you're building. Figure out what can you provide faster and more securely, because that always matters, than these larger players. Because they're just putting anything together and trying to see what works and what gets the good amount of feedback. Whereas you can really think more deeply about how do I make an experience that my customer will love and be delighted by. So, with that being said, let's get into some of the questions that we have for this week. Uh, I am always looking for new questions from the audience. So, if you have a question, definitely put that in the chat. uh, you know, comment, and also I gotta do the YouTube thing, like, comment, and subscribe. I haven't been doing that, but please let me know what you like. Let me know what you'd like to hear and how I can improve and make this more helpful for you. So thank you.
How can I learn multiple programming languages?
So you don't learn a programming language by memorizing syntax. You learn them by focusing on some key concepts that all programming languages have. Every language you use when you're dealing with computers or when you're dealing with a digital system is going to have a control flow concept, a data structure or variable concept, a way to handle errors and exceptions, and a way to do and use some of the dependencies from the actual computer itself, like accessing the operating system, but also accessing external APIs. When you're learning a new programming language, I would first say start with learning one programming language and then make sure you understand all of the concepts and ideas that I just described from that single language and be able to think about them coherently. Once you have that mental model established, then you can look at another language and say, hey, how do I do a control flow statement in this language that gives me the same ex- example or the same logic that I had in the language I'm more familiar with, right? You're always going to need to know how to do a loop. You're always going to need to know how to do or how to take some condition and have two different paths for what can happen inside of your program. Be able to express that in any language. That's key. Being able to understand the variables and how to create and use variables inside of the language. Understanding what are the primitives that that language uses. Uh, in JavaScript, they have undefined versus a null object, which is technically in any other language, it would not be the same idea. So once you understand what we're talking about in one language, it'll be super helpful for you to move that into something differently. But you really have to focus on mastering one language before you try to extend into the others. One of the best things you can do once you master that language is try to build a project, something simple. It could be a calculator app, it could be some type of hello world project, something that you're super familiar with and is simple to build and has some standard concepts that you can understand. Build that in the next language and see how the functions look from Java to TypeScript. See how the concurrency that you added in your Golang program looks when you're using a Python app. Even understanding what a global variable is for one language versus the other. Having that mirror that you can use to say, oh, this is what it looks like here and this is what it looks like here is a great way to know and ensure that you have learned what there is needed to learn from that language. Um, they all are the same. It's like learning any language that we use as humans to speak and communicate with each other. You're not coming up with entirely new concepts from French to English. And a lot of the languages all are descendants from one common set of ideas. That is the same for any programming language you use. There are C based languages that all have and share similar concepts, variables, and types. There are languages like TypeScript, which is a direct, like literally, it's just JavaScript with, um, what do you call it? It's JavaScript with types, pretty much. That's pretty much what it is. But it's like you can't not use a type with TypeScript. You have to use it. Versus with JavaScript, anything could be anything throughout your program. So it just makes it a little bit more easily controlled. Um, in my career, I've been fortunate enough to professionally work with a number of different programming languages. And so I've built APIs for retail companies with Java. I've migrated Java applications to Golang to make sure we're moving legacy platforms into a more high performance uh, technology. I've built applications with Python and data pipelines to make sure we're pulling data from databases and uploading them to edge uh, edge locations securely and efficiently. So I've been fortunate enough to use different programming languages, and I would even extend the concept of using multiple and learning multiple programming languages to the same with frameworks. When you're learning a new framework, you don't need to understand everything about that framework unless you are building it from scratch. Unless you are the first developer, first engineer on that team that it has to decide which direction we're going in at this moment. If you're doing that, then I would suggest you learn the language incredibly deeply, or you should know the language really deeply, because every decision you make is going to have trade offs that you need to at least be aware of early on. Even just picking a language introduces a trade off that must be thought about. But other than that, you don't need to learn everything about Spring Boot when you're coming in to enhance or even fix bugs inside of an existing Java app. You just need to understand and be able to read the logic that exists inside of that app. So just keep that in mind as you're going and jumping into new projects. But something I've been focusing on recently is really focusing on that single language, that single stack that you can use to build anything. Mine is Golang, Flutter, Python, and building this on top of AWS. And of course, you're going to use some other technologies like Docker, to host and package your apps. But pick a language, stick to it as much as possible, and build as much as you can with that language before you try to do anything differently.
What does persistence, high availability, and disaster recovery have in common?
So they're all risk management systems for systems that we know will fail. So persistence just means how much of the data will be available in the event of an issue, or how likely it is for that data to have been saved after some transaction. High availability means how much of the system is still usable when something is breaking or something is not working. Can you still access certain features? Uh, and disaster recovery means when something really bad happens, whether there's a breach, data breach, or security breach, or there is a significant downtime inside of one of your core services, can your system come back online in a reliable, timely, and accurate manner? So, disaster recovery is the combination of having persistence and high availability. When you're building a mission critical system, such as in financial services or healthcare or even government tech, you have to think about designing those systems with these concepts in mind. We cannot have any significant downtime inside of a water treatment plant. You cannot have significant downtime inside of the backbone of the internet. If we're thinking networks, um, and routers, that type of infrastructure. Having high availability means you have more than one instance running. So when you're thinking about system design interviews and high availability comes up, or how do you make your application have 9 nines? Usually that is some combination of vertical and horizontal scaling, which means you either make sure you never run out of data, or make sure that the database is not the uh, bottleneck by just adding more storage. You pack as much storage as you can into it, or your application API server is not the bottleneck by adding a bunch of memory to it, so and compute. You can do that, but you can also have multiple smaller instances of your app that are running on logically separated and physically separated hardware, where you may have a version of your app running inside of a node inside of the AWS East region and inside of the AWS Western region. That's a form of high availability. You have multiple instances, so if one goes down, the other one can still handle some of those requests. Um, and I say some of those requests because you have to plan what high availability looks like for you and how long it takes for that response or those requests to fail over to the working instance. Persistence is the concept of making sure your database is able to capture any types of transactions that are going through it and making sure that if the transaction does not happen as expected, we're able to roll back all of the changes that may have started. Uh, a key requirement if you want to say you have high persistence is to make sure you are backing up your data. I mentioned it last week, having source control. Having another version of your data, not just version, but another copy of your data is incredibly useful if you want to persist that data. Databases fail all the time. Make sure your business critical tables are not just being stored on one uh, computer that can die. Some platforms like AWS, they actually provide that type of persistence automatically. Well, I won't say automatically. They're doing a lot of work in the background to make sure it's automatic and it feels normal to you. But if you're having some type of on-prem applications, you need to do that yourself and have that in mind and keep that in mind. These concepts are all about building resilience. And resilience is not about avoiding failure. It's about making sure you have a plan in place and a system in place so that when a failure happens, all is not lost, that you can recover stronger later.
What are three mistakes that junior engineers make?
So a junior engineer is going to add complexity into the system that their senior counterparts are hoping doesn't even make it in. Junior engineers may focus on just completing a task, adding the PR, adding some lines of code. And they may not think about how their application or their feature that they're building relates to the rest of the team and how the team operates, or even the way the business goals are meant to be defined. They may not ask how a change is going to affect users, whether the users are internal or external. They may focus on writing clever code that does something super unique versus writing readable code that someone behind them can take over and inherit and actually make sense of. And a junior engineer may over rely on frameworks or even AI tools where a senior would understand the limitations of these tools and technologies and ways to overcome them. And this is not a character flaw for junior engineers as a whole. This is really just a stage of development because when you're first getting started in your career, you may not understand all of the different nuances of what it means to be an engineer. Our job is not just to write code and add features. Our job is to solve problems. And if you're working in a business, your job is to solve business problems. And so you don't want to focus so much on doing the engineering of the goal or engineering part of your job without understanding I am part of a business that needs to work. So, as a business, the people who are here today may not be here with us tomorrow. So, what does that mean? That means we have to create systems to transition new team members into the team. That means we have to have applications that someone who has never looked at the code base before for that app can be able to take a look and understand within a few hours or days what's actually going on. We have to have APIs and distributed systems that can be troubleshooted at 3 a.m. when something goes wrong. So that means adding logs that make sense, right? So as a junior engineer, you may not think about all of these things that are still important as an engineer. You may just focus on what was included inside of that ticket from the lead. And these are things that can be identified and solved with mentorship. If you're a junior engineer, find someone who has been in the game a lot longer than you. Talk to them and discuss your code. Look through some of the PRs that are coming in, not just from a we need to get this feature in perspective. Actually, look for opportunities to get real feedback on ways you can improve the structure of your code. And maybe not during the PR cycle. If you know you have a feature that needs to go out, get that feature out. And then work with a senior later on to say, all right, how could I have made this better? How can I make it better in the future? And really listen to that feedback because you can only learn by learning from people who have done it already.
What is the difference between an error and an exception?
The main difference is how you recover and if you even can recover. An error that happens inside of your program is usually unrecoverable. When they happen, something critical is either missing or has broken that makes it unsafe for this application to continue running. An exception is something that is not so severe, and so your application can actually recover from it once either after that request or once a resource is back in place. So you may throw an exception when a request out to an S3 bucket fails. Maybe you're getting some data from your client and trying to upload it into a S3 bucket. And that upload fails for some reason. It could have been a network connection issue, it could have been a memory issue, something very simple that is only going to happen right now. You can recover from that and maybe retry or give the user, the client, a message saying this failed because of this. Now, an error is something that is more permanent. Maybe there is an issue with the permissions that your application has, and it's more not just for this specific request, maybe a credential that your application needs to actually authenticate with some of these external services. Maybe that hasn't been loaded correctly. So that is an error that needs to fail, because no matter what the application does from now, no matter who you send that message to from now, nothing in that system will work from here on. Uh, Errors should and are usually thrown early inside of the runtime, right? When you're loading some database credentials, when you're establishing a database connection or some connection to some other system. You can know very early, hey, we don't have this, let's pause, let someone know. Exceptions are usually things you find out over time because some data or some state of the data is not matching what your system expected it to be like. And that could be due to some type of user input violations, or it could be due to some, no, just something happened just now that we have to kind of recover from. And in your code, you have to handle errors and exceptions differently. You don't want to treat every exception as an error. That will make your application super unreliable. It might never work if you fail or panic every time something goes wrong or not according to plan. You want to make sure you are logging errors and exceptions. When anything that happens, you need to make sure it's being recorded so that a developer can go in and actually troubleshoot why did this happen, when did it happen, and what needs to be changed to make sure it doesn't happen again. Having those logs in place makes your job much easier come the future. The difference between errors and exceptions is something that most people don't always uh, value, but it's something that will change the way you're building your application. So definitely learn the difference and keep them in mind as you're building and iterating.
What should you include in a README?
So going back to operationalizing the systems that you're building, your README needs to be an operational tool for any engineers or developers on your team. That means the README needs to have some clear guidelines on what the application is meant to do and how to run that application so you can even try to get it to do what it needs to do. A good README is going to reduce the amount of time necessary to onboard new teammates, and it's going to make it easier to get started with a project that you haven't worked on in a few weeks or even months. When you have your README in place and it's good and it's well written, this is an example and a signal to other members of your team and other people that you have some maturity. And it means that, and it gives some indication that the rest of your application is going to be well built. The README is like the welcome mat for your application. If we're seeing it not having things, not being organized, and things all over the place inside of the README, I can only imagine what the rest of the code base looks like. A bare README is going to make it difficult to trust what's inside of that code and what's inside of the application because it's more difficult to get started with. So at the minimum, make sure you include who worked on it, how to run it, and what it's meant to do. If you want to get real flashy with it, you can include some screenshots of what it looks like when certain things are happening or a link to a demo. You may not include that inside of the README itself, but you may link to that asset. You can include people to contact for troubleshooting errors or issues, or even if you have any questions about the application. Who worked on this? Who can I speak to that would have the best amount of context for solving the issue that I'm experiencing? Uh, and you can even include some very high level descriptions of the organization of your code base. In my code bases, I say make it clear where you can find different things, where you can find the configuration, where you can find the environment variables, where you can find the repository layer versus the business logic. Having all of that defined and clear inside of your README, again, it just makes it much easier for everyone to move forward without any significant headaches. That's pretty much all we have for this week. Again, thank you for joining. Let me know if any of this was helpful. And some final thoughts. I just want to let you know that you won't earn a name by playing it safe. If you're trying to do the thing that everyone is doing, if you're doing the thing that we all know is going to work, you're not really stretching yourself in the most significant way. If you recognize your greatness and you know who you are and what you can do, you should be tackling problems that are and feel beyond your current capabilities. Don't do what's regular and easy just because it's something that you feel that is regular and easy. You gotta extend, you gotta take that step beyond what is normal for you and what is normal even for society and the people around you. That means taking a risk. Take a risk with your projects, take a risk with your time, and not foolish risks. I'm not saying go subway surfing because you never went subway surfing before. I'm saying start that company that you hadn't thought about in a few months. Build the app that you know is going to change the world. Go harder than you thought you could go, because even if you don't succeed at the thing that you're looking for, the outcome will still show and prove to yourself how amazing you really are. So we're not here to play it safe. We're not here to do what everyone else is doing. We are here to make a name of us for ourselves. We are here to change the world. We are here to change our families, generations that come, and not just local. Man, we here to switch this whole thing up. So that's my just little quick tip for you. Don't try to hunt rats. Go battle that lion, because everyone wants to hear the story about the hunter that chose the lion as the prey, not the one who captured a couple raccoons. And also, shout out to my little cousin, Baby Z. Happy birthday to her. Um, she is, I think, 3 right now. I'm not sure. I gotta actually check. But happy birthday to her. I hope she is feeling lovely and feeling loved, and that she knows she is loved regardless. Um, and Merry Christmas, Happy Kwanzaa, and Happy Holidays to everyone who is partaking. Um, I hope this week is happy for you. You enjoy the time with the family. You get some rest if you need it, and you just enjoy the holiday season. Right? We are nearly at the end of the year, so Make sure you enjoying this time with the family and everything is all great. So with that being said, thank you for joining. Peace out.